Hey guys, you're listening to the Energy of the Untamed Heart podcast, where we talk about uncaging your divinely gifted wild heart to be as free and expansive as you were born to be. My goal is to use our stories, guest interviews, and your questions to tease out what has been keeping your wild heart under wraps. I'm your host, Mielle Fox, and together we will shatter the myths of our old stories to set our wild heart free. So thanks for choosing you and showing up today. Really, the whole essence of the podcast for me is to just bring folks on and share some time and tell some stories and allow whatever needs to come through. And hopefully there's
Yeah.
something there that whoever's listening is like, oh my gosh, thank God they said that because I really needed to hear that. It's basically just exchanging information, philosophy, stories, that kind of thing. So the
Yeah.
essence of the podcast is, how can we get back to who we really are? How can we unload the layers and layers and layers of defenses and bricks and walls that we have, whether we know it or don't know it, have applied over our heart that prevents us from really expressing to who we are? Are there any pivotal events that kind of gave you the like, oh, I really saw this as XYZ, and so now I've moved in a different direction, or this is what it took for me to slow down and really recognize that I've not been living my most genuine, authentic, purest self. So those kinds of
Yeah.
stories. And the other thing that I think is really key that I like to bring forward for people is, we all can hear the whispers of our heart in whatever way that speaks and resonates to us. And that varies person to person. For some of us,
Yeah.
it's music, art, dance, being creative in whatever way. Everybody
Is
has
that
their
the name
own
of your podcast?
energy
Whispers
of
of
the
the Heart?
untamed heart. It should be
I
whispers
love
of the
that.
heart. It could be whispers of the heart.
Well, you just said that, and I was like, that's a great podcast name,
Isn't
Whispers of the
it?
Heart. I like
Whispers of
that.
the heart. Yeah, because I really feel like our mind is so loud and speaks so much and so often that we don't hear those whispers. We don't hear our soul and our heart really trying to speak to our humanness. It's in there. It's just quiet, and it's time to kind of dim down the head noise and get into the heart sound and really listen.
Yeah.
That's what I like to share and
Yeah.
talk about, because
I
it's
love
different for
it.
every person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
Absolutely.
so that's kind of where do I come from. So tell me where you come from.
Yeah. Well, my story kind of echoes that. For years, I felt like I was living a completely different life, a completely different story through a lens of why me? And only recently do I feel like I've actually broken that pattern in my life of calling people into my life through relationships that would teach me the lessons that I still needed to learn about owning this as my story. And for a really long time, I didn't want to own my story. It's domestic violence, it's narcissistic abuse, it's embarrassing, it's shameful. We don't like to talk about it, and so it took a long time for me to say, yes, this is my story. I've learned the lessons, I've grown, but it's my story and it's not someone else's story. And it's a story of healing those parts within me that had me feeling unworthy for so long, unworthy of love and whatever, that you call these people into your life that reflect that energy back to you. And so over and over again, I would call these people into my life who would reflect that through the manipulation or the abusive words, the criticisms, the critiques, the gaslighting, and just never feeling like you're enough, like I'm enough.
It's really
And so
interesting.
they,
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
but they would show up as exactly the exact teachers I need. And so for a long time, I couldn't say that, but now I can say that And I saw the two men who fit this role in my marriage. I saw them as monsters, but now I don't. Over time, I would continue to ask, why me? I was a domestic violence advocate, domestic violence attorney. I know the cycle. I've worked with women and men who have been victims of this, but I didn't realize I was in those relationships, because with narcissistic abuse, it's very subtle. It's over time. I just kept this like victim mindset for a really long time. Sometimes I think, maybe there was parts of me that was still drawn into the drama or drawn into the story or drawn into the victimhood of what was happening to me versus what was for me. And really, it wasn't until after 17 years within these two marriages where, and my last marriage ended in violence, where I found myself going blind. And I had lost multiple homes. I lost a home in a fire. I lost a home to a hurricane. I had a baby born with an extremely rare genetic disorder. I had lots of loved ones die from COVID-19. My first ex-husband committed suicide just a couple of weeks ago. I felt like I was just sitting in this rubble of my life saying like, why me? Why me? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person. I was a good wife. I was a good mother, all these things. Yet all this stuff just kept happening to me and happening to me. And so kind of like what you were talking about with you and your theme here, I lost my eyesight for about 6 weeks and I was sitting there just like, what is the lesson here? Why am I losing my eyesight? Who else in history lost their eyesight? What's the lesson? And I really felt like, Stephany, you're not seeing your story through the right lens. And it goes
Wow.
back to owning this as my story. And so I really had this huge epiphany, this paradigm shift, if you will. Like, Stephany, you need to see your story through a different lens. Because when you're stuck in victimhood, you can't see the lessons. You can't see what is for you because everything is just against you. When I decided that I need to be the heroine, the hero of my story, not the victim, then I was able to see the lessons. When you see the lessons, what needs to be healed, what needs to be released, what needs to be let go, and you can break the patterns in your life. And so that's really what happened to me. I was stuck at my sister's house in Missouri. I say stuck. It was nice to be there, but I didn't expect to spend 6 weeks because I couldn't see. But literally, when I made that shift, when I made that paradigm shift, I started to get my eyesight back, all of this stuff. I think sometimes the universe, God, source, whomever we resonate with, gives us these moments if we get curious and if we get silent and we get calm and we look outside of our situation. Because also, a lot of times you don't realize you're in these relationships until you take a
Absolutely.
step back. Because when you see it all happening, just little bits, little criticisms, little critiques, it's hard to see it in the grand picture until you step back and then you see it in the totality and you're like, oh my God, this is
Yeah.
horrible. This is toxic. This is not right.
Your story
And so
is huge. I mean, this is huge.
it's,
Yeah.
it is.
And I'll let you continue with the chapter of the story, but I just want to honor you and really acknowledge what it takes to have the wherewithal to listen to the message and say, oh, huh, I'm wondering if I could get curious about this here. And I also really feel very much that universe hands us the message and tries to hand it to us a lot of times in a lot of different ways. But sometimes if we're in that
Yep.
victim mode, we're not listening. It's almost like la, 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 and we're not able to hear it, see it, acknowledge it, own it, all those things. And I think when the message needs to come through, God bless, the universe says, listen, I tried to tell you. I really tried to tell you. So now I'm going to drop you on your butt, sit your ass down so that you can have a moment to hear what we've been trying to tell you. And
Yes.
I have no doubt that your changing your vision was absolutely your wake up call, where universe said, hey, Stephany,
Yes.
girlfriend, we've been trying to tell you. We actually even put you in a career where you could be reflected day in and day out. We're trying to tell you something. And your
Mm-hmm.
human Stephany was like, la, 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 la. Universe says, girlfriend,
Yeah.
you're not listening. So now we're really going to tell you. And your assessment of, oh, I must be needing to see this through a different kind of a lens. Hallelujah. Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting to me how many people I talk to, both on the podcast and just in life in general, that there is always some kind of a turning point. And for everybody, it's a little different. So there's really no comparison. Like, is my aha moment bigger, better, harder, whatever than the next person? It doesn't really matter because everybody's on their own thing. So there's no mine's worse than yours or mine's better than yours or whatever. But very often, I definitely hear when I speak to people, yeah, I suddenly had whatever, a major shift or change in my physical well-being or my health, or I lost my home,
Mm-hmm.
or I lost my job, or I something that I would call like the big sit you on your ass wake up call. Like, hey,
Yeah.
hey
Oh yeah.
man, we're talking to you. You best be listening. So please continue with your
Mm-hmm.
story. Continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like we're saying, maybe there's a lesson and I actually wasn't seeing my life clearly. And so, yeah, God, universe, source, spirit, whomever we connect with, they give us these moments in time, whether it's through losing everything or whether it's through a physical manifestation like me with my eyesight. But if we do get curious and we give ourselves that grace and we ask the right questions, we can start to see that there is some truth in everything that is manifesting around us, something that is crying out to us to pay attention to. So much for me that I was physically unable to see my story playing out right in front of me because I needed to see it through a different lens. I needed to shift from the victim story to the heroine story. And when I shifted that energy from my exes being monsters in my life, trying to destroy my life, trying to ruin me, all of this stuff, I could, like I said, I could start to see the lessons. And as I started to take my power back, I could see what needed to be healed. I could see what needed to be released. I could see where I needed more compassion, where I needed more forgiveness. But ultimately, I could see the patterns and the shifts in my story that I thought was my reality, but it is no longer.
Yeah.
And as I look at so many people out there, especially women, but also men who find themselves in toxic relationships or abusive relationships or relationships with narcissists, it's a pattern. It's a pattern of unworthiness. And sometimes it's so hard to see that with the idealization phase, the love bombing, and then you get the hooked and the trauma bond. And sometimes it's so hard to see all of that right in front of us until, like I said, we lose it all. We pause, we ask the right questions, we get still. And when we make that shift, we can see what is for us, not all the why me, which was a big thing for me. And I remember when I learned all of this, when I had this epiphany moment, when I made the shift, I really felt like I heard that still small voice within us, Stephany, it is done. You have broke the patterns, you have learned the lessons. And that's why I share my story. Because I also want people to say, you have shifted the patterns and it is done. And that's where true freedom comes from.
I love that you own in your story that you had a choice of, I can remain a victim, I can stay in this story, or I can rewrite my story. And instead of being the victim of my story, I can be the hero in my story. And again, what that really boils down to is, do we choose that? And I
Yeah.
do feel that for many, both men and women, because let's be honest, narcissistic relationships and domestic abuse relationships are not 100% women only. There are men in
Yeah.
our society who suffer equally in whatever version
Mm-hmm.
that shows up for them. So it is absolutely that experience of codependency. The question really boils down to, do we lean into these codependent patterns because it keeps us in that unhappy comfort zone, but it's comfortable because you know it, it's familiar, there's some obscured sense of safety within it, you believe, although that's not really true, but that's in the moment what's projected, what you believe you're seeing as your truth at that time. And by allowing yourself that paradigm shift, by allowing yourself to be able to say, well, what if this could look different for me? What if
Yeah.
what if my what I see isn't really all there is? What if there was another way this could present? And taking, as you said, the time to pause and reflect, is this the only way this can show up? I think is absolutely that first step to, I don't need to stay in, although it's a bizarre dichotomy of, it's a comfort zone, but it's a comfort zone in a box that when you look at it from the outside, you would say, well, who wants to stay in that? But yet when you're in it,
Exactly.
you don't see that you're in it. Your
Mm-hmm.
example of your story, I find fascinating that of all the fields of your legal career, you chose the field that was a direct mirror of what you needed in your life for yourself. That is, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's interesting if you think about it, like, oh, of all the things that you could have been doing, isn't it interesting that that's the way it showed up for you? That's the way it got mirrored to you. But in the moment, until you had the aha event, your mind was so loud that it was not allowing you. It was telling you the story like, oh, it's my clients, it's not me. Oh, it's out there, it's not
Mm-hmm.
inside. So your mind was speaking so loudly that you couldn't hear your heart. And you couldn't hear your heart until such time as the universe said, "Oh, hang on, Steph. Let's help you listen a little louder here, my friend." And
Yeah.
thankfully, you had the wherewithal to say, "Oh, huh, what I've been doing hasn't been working. Let me see if there's another way." Blessedly and fortunately, you absolutely chose a direction that has clearly improved your version of who you are and how you show up in the world. And I think for some men and women, that fear that's associated with the self-worth not being there, it's so convoluted and wrapped up. It's not like there's just one variable or just one thing. There's just so many intertwined layers to these codependent relationships that it does make it hard to see it. It really
Well,
does
and
make it difficult. Yeah.
it does when you don't always realize you are stuck and you are in a relationship, like a toxic relationship or a relationship with a narcissist, because again, it doesn't the patterns of domestic violence. They're not always violent. Although my first husband was not violent, but my second husband was violent. But it's just the subtle stuff and what keeps you hooked, because so many people, well, why don't you just leave? Well, why don't you just walk away or do this? People don't understand the trauma bond. So let me explain that for any listeners who are feeling like they're stuck or have friends that, oh, I've told my friend over and over again, this is an abusive relationship, get out. The issue, which makes it so complex, is the trauma bond. So a trauma bond, the cycle of abuse with a narcissist, it follows a cycle of idealization, devaluation, and discard. And so in the beginning, it's the honeymoon phase. There's a lot of love, attention. There's words like, oh, we're soulmates, we're twin flames, we're meant to be together. Like, I manifested you, you're my gift from God, sending you flowers, just everything to get you hooked. And once you are hooked, then becomes the next phase in the cycle is the devaluation. That's where the manipulation comes in, the gaslighting, the criticisms, the critiques. And so then it goes back to love bombing, and then devaluation again until there's a final discard where they walk away, or finally you have enough self-worth and love for yourself that you walk away. And so you get stuck in this cycle because there's a lot of intermittent reinforcement. In the beginning, it's like, well, we know they know how to love because they showed us that in the beginning. So why are they being mean? And so you keep waiting for that next love bombing. I also explain it as like a drug addiction. So the first time you use a drug, you get this really, really high dopamine release. And then the next time you use, you're hoping to get that same high, but you never get that same high because every time you use, the dopamine levels go down and down and down. And that's what keeps you hooked and addicted. And it's very similar with a trauma bond. You know that they know how to love. And so even when they are mean or manipulating you, criticizing you or whatever, you're like, okay, well, I know I can get through this because they do know how to love. And so it keeps you hooked in the cycle, which makes it very difficult to walk away from, because it, like a drug addiction, you have to break that bond.
Absolutely. What I hear as you describe this, the love bombing and the drug addiction analogy, I don't wanna say this with any disrespect to anybody, but I see it as it all comes back to giving everything outside of yourself, that you don't feel enough love of yourself, that you are worthy of better than what you're in, that you are worthy of being in a situation that you don't have to trade for love, that you don't have to exchange to receive the love. I will tell you, for me personally, growing up, the message, and it wasn't clear to me until I was an adult, but the message was so clear to me as a child that you had to earn love. You had to earn it by whatever, be the good girl, get the good grades, do the thing. There were conditions. And if you didn't meet the conditions, the love was withheld in some way. And it very subtle, very, very subtle. It became an awareness as an adult. I didn't catch it early on. It's a conditioning event, it's a pattern. And over many, many years, through multiple relationships, all kinds of relationships, work relationships, friendships, lovers, that message for me for a very long time was continually reinforced. And like you, I was
Yeah.
like, well, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep
Yeah.
ending up in these situations? Why do I keep attracting these kinds of connections? And I had a few ahas myself, but I really got to a place where like, well, perhaps this keeps happening because I keep inviting it, which I
Yeah.
have to be really
Mm-hmm.
honest is you sometimes kind of go, oh, I don't really want to own this one. Sometimes it's a little hard to swallow that I brought all this on myself through my
Oh,
choices,
yeah.
through my giving
Yeah.
away my true self, through my bartering. If I do this, I'll be loved. If I do this, I'll be accepted. If I do this, I won't be rejected. If I give that essence of you're a good girl, you're a good woman, and I receive that externally, then that validates who do I think I really am, like all the things. And like you, I got tired of being the victim. I got really tired of the exchanging. I have to perform at a particular level mentally, emotionally, and otherwise in order to be okay, loved, liked, accepted. And that was a really huge wake up call for me to say, that's nice, Miel, but guess what? You're the one that brought it on. And maybe there's a reason this is happening. And maybe you ought to just sit yourself down and think on this one, feel on this one. It has not been a straight line, I'll tell you that. It's been a very circuitous journey with ups and downs. And I think for some, both men and women, to own it and say, oh, I actually brought this on, which changes the question from, well, why me? And instead of why me, like, why is this happening to me? The why me, this is happening for me. The answer is pretty straightforward because you come from a place of love. You were divinely created and made and brought here in a state of love from universe, God, source, divine. And as such, why me is because you're here to be in service to purpose. You're here to express love at its greatest available expansion and expression. And the only way you can do that is to tap back in to who you really are at your soul essence, who you really are at your deepest place, what your heart really speaks and whispers to you. And until you can get back to that place, you give yourself away to everybody else, hoping they're going to fill the void. And it's not a void. It's not like you don't have any love in you. It's in there. You've just buried it, but you've covered it up. You've put so many layers and blankets over it that you can't feel it and hear it. I really feel like, as hard as it is to own, oh, I did this to myself. Okay, well, okay. So you don't have to continue that way. You can change it.
Yeah. It's owning the story, no matter how hard it is to own the story. I don't like this being my story, but you know what? There's a purpose and a meaning for everything I went through. And if I can share that and other people can learn from my lessons and my mistakes and what I went through, then it was worth it. And I'm still standing here today. It's not like it destroyed me, although there are many times when it felt like it was going to destroy me.
Yes.
But going back to the lessons, for a long time, I looked at these two men who inflicted all of this on me as monsters. But when I was able to own my story and become the hero of my story and take my power back, then I could go back, and I did. I got a really big journal and I sat down and said, okay, husband number one, Josh. And then I started every sentence with thank you. Thank you for showing me how important boundaries are. Because for so many years, he was a covert narcissist. He was a cheater, cheated all the time. And I did not have boundaries. I mean, I would tell him, like, don't do this. But then I became boundaries for him. Like, confronting other women, he's married, like blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, you are only responsible for your boundaries and you need to have boundaries. So I could say, thank you, Josh, for showing me how important boundaries are. And I must have strong, solid, the unmovable, unshakable boundaries in my life. Go to second husband, Jace, which is so crazy too. You think about like calling these people in. They were both Aquarius. Josh and Jace, their birthdays were right next to each other. They almost looked similar. I'm like, didn't see that. I thought I went in with boundaries. But he kept pushing my boundaries. I would move him a little bit. He would push them a little bit more, and I would push them a little bit more. And so, did I really have boundaries? No. So I could write, thank you, Jace, for showing me that although I had boundaries, I must be firm. I cannot move my boundaries for anyone. And so just one line at a time, reflecting on these relationships to pull every single lesson out, because I will tell you, I'm not going to marry a third narcissist. I'm done. I have broken the patterns, but it's really until you learn all these lessons, because that's what the universe gives us, these lessons. I always tell people too, my second husband, I thought I was completely healed. I thought I had learned the lessons. And so when I went into the next relationship, I manifested him. I put the list out to the universe, very, very specific. It's divorced dad with only boys, tall, dark, handsome. I went for looks this time, all these things. And a week later, I met him. He checked every single box. And so, what do you do when you feel like, okay, I've manifested this person? And I did. And then when he's saying, oh, we're soulmates and all this, well, I believed him. I manifested him. But I like to say, God, source, and all the divine wisdom out there also gave me the unlearned, the unhealed lessons. And until we learn those lessons and break these patterns, we will continue to call these people in, even though I manifested him. God gave him to me.
You got what you asked for. You absolutely got what you asked for.
What you asked for. And
yes.
And I got all the unhealed lessons, all the lessons that I did not learn the first time around. And so, okay, you got my attention, God. I am learning these lessons. I am healing because I do not want to manifest a third relationship because I know I will get what I want. And I know God and all the divineness will give me those lessons because I need to learn them.
Yes. And I feel for sure, I hear you say what I hear from many, many, again, men and women is, geez, I really thought I was past that. I thought I'd healed that. And I say this myself, like, I simply cannot believe I'm having to do this again. And we do have to do this again, because if you don't truly integrate the lesson at your deepest, deepest core self, there are little bits and pieces and remnants of it still floating around in some other cycle in your life, because we're just a series of these repeating cycles through our whole life. It will show up in some other way, and you will continue to get the message until you clear the message. It just keeps showing up until you get it. And which is amazing that universal wisdom is so full of stamina that they just won't let go.
Right.
You're like, hey, we got to send it to you. Oh, okay. I'm like, oh,
persistent.
right.
So
Persistent, right? Sometimes you're like, what? But yeah, so I used to be really irritated. Like something would show up. I'm like, gosh, I was about to swear, but I won't. I would be like, you got to be kidding me. This is it's here again. I can't even believe this. Then I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, it's here again. Oh, clearly there's something I need to know. There's something I need to work through. So it's also, I used to not be as open to receiving. Not that I wasn't open to receiving a message, but I was certainly not open to receiving a message in such a way as, could I look at this event, this thing, as another way to learn something? Because the reality is, one, we're here on earth to either teach or learn, period. Teach or learn. That's what we're here for. Our interactions and exchanges and relationships that we have in our entire lifetime are here specifically, again, for what? To either learn a lesson or give a lesson. So equally so, just as you wrote a letter of thanks and gratitude to each of your previous husbands for the lessons that they provided for you, similarly, if they had chosen to sit down, they could probably have also written a similar letter thanking you for the lessons that you provided to them. Although I realize we're probably sitting here like, I wonder what that would be. But I'm sure there's a lesson in there, absolutely, because I really feel as here we are, we're these souls in human bodies on earth to do what? To experience earth life, to experience all of it, the nice, the not nice, the good, the bad, all of it. Because why? It gives us perspective and tools to use to work through the lessons we're here to learn or to give, whichever the case may be. And if we can just learn to step out of our way of attaching the judgment to it. Oh, I did this thing. I was in a relationship and I allowed myself to be mistreated, does that make me a bad person? If you can release that piece of it, which is pretty much what occurred with your gratitude expression to each of your
Mhm.
spouses, ex-spouses, by letting go without the attachment, without the what's connected to this piece, that is the most freeing piece to me. That's the piece that lets you
Yes.
truly reach your place of internal authenticity and freedom, when you're able to say, I saw that, I recognize it, but it no longer has a hold over me. It no longer has
Mhm.
power over me. I can see it, and I actually say, thank you for showing up, because your showing up allowed me to see within myself this place that required healing. So I thank you. Even though it may have been the most god awful event ever, things don't show up without a reason, in my
Oh, yeah. And,
perspective.
yeah, agreed. Well, and, it's like for so long I wanted to forgive them because forgiveness is for us, not for them. But when you are stuck in that victim mindset, it's hard to find that compassion. It is hard to even want to forgive. It's easier to hold on to the anger and hold on to the bitterness and the resentment and hold on to, I'm the victim. I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I have to keep constantly forgiving them? But when you can make that shift, that no, they were just teachers here to teach you very hard, tearful, painful lessons, then it is much easier to have compassion and it is much easier to forgive.
I agree. I think also sometimes I think about this, why, we get angry, like, well, how come I have to do all the forgiving? Like, how come they can't do the forgiving? And again, that's not the point. The point isn't, is my forgiveness better, worse than your forgiveness? No, it's really about what I call take the high road. It doesn't matter you to them, them to you. At the end of the day, it's, can you offer not just the words, but truly offer yourself the space and the forgiveness just to accept that you're a work in progress, and that this is life on earth. This is how it goes. It isn't always pretty. It isn't always straightforward. It isn't always right and wrong. It is simply the process
Mhm.
of evolving in this lifetime. And I think a lot of people struggle with the forgiving of self, because they don't actually love themselves as much as they're believing they love others.
The guilt and the shame around all this. Why didn't you just leave? Why did you stay for so long? Why did you waste 17 years of your life within these two marriages that were horrible? You have to release that guilt. You have to release that shame and let it go and just and have compassion on yourself and grace for yourself because well, obviously there were still a lot of lessons, still a lot of lessons in there. I'm out of them now. I'm empowered. I'm helping to empower other people to get out of this, but yeah, you have to release all that. You have to let it go and you have to have grace for yourself that at the time you stayed because you kept thinking they would change
Yes. And grace
and they
and
didn't.
compassion. And sometimes they don't, because that's the continual reminder to get you to the forgiveness road. It
Yeah.
will keep showing up until you finally can say, there is no shame in what occurred, because in that moment, at that time, I didn't necessarily understand or know. And that's okay. For good, for bad, for it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. That's okay. I still can love that me at that time. It wasn't right or wrong or otherwise. And I think for many of us, myself included, releasing guilt and shame is not the easiest sometimes, because it
Mm.
forces you to really look deep and really look inside
Yeah.
and really, really be okay with saying, I'm a work in progress, and I still love myself as a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Well, and
that's,
that's why
yeah.
I was going to say I'm also an EFT practitioner. It has been such a key tool for me in sitting with this and releasing it, sitting with the guilt of staying too long, sitting with feeling like my story's too shameful or whatever. And so when I became an EFT practitioner, I actually didn't know I was signing up to become an EFT practitioner. It was 2020. I had left my second husband and I was just desperate for something. I'm like, I did not know what was wrong in our relationship. I needed a healing tool. And so one of my friends posted on Facebook, and I thought I was signing up to just have some sessions, but I ended up signing up for a whole course, which was great. The universe shows up when we need something. And I know that everything I went through, the universe is not going to not give me the tools to get through it. And so when I became a practitioner, it was just hours and days and months and years. I'm at the point where something comes up, I can easily just sit with it, release it, let it go, move on with my day and my life. I have that much awareness
Yes, but that
now.
takes time to develop. It takes
It
time and
does.
it takes grace, because we're the we want it yesterday society. Oh, I have 50 years of conditional trauma loaded up on top of my body, but you know what? I really like to clear that up in about 20 minutes. You got 20 minutes? Let's do this. That's not really how it works. you know, you
No, and
it
that's
took
why I
50
said
years to pile it
hours and
on.
hours. And
Yes.
yes.
But thankfully, thank God for having modalities that allow us to gently and compassionately work through these layers to get back to our heart. And the beauty of emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping, is that by using energetic movement through the meridian points along with the verbal expression of what's really going on, it amps up the transformational capacity of your being. So it just kind of speeds it up because you're combining multiple modalities of energy movement. It's nice that it's a toolbox you have in your pocket, and anywhere you're going, well, there you are. I mean, that's really great. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really happy that you have found your vision again, that you're bringing this forward for other
Yes.
people, that you're using your story and being the heroine in your story now to share with other men and women and really help them see the possibilities, because that's truly it. What are the possibilities? What would you like to see for yourself, and how can we help you do it? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
do it. You're the one that's going to do it. But people who have modalities and compassion to walk part of the journey with you, it's really significant to know that you're not alone, that there's a way, there's a possibility, and it's a choice. So I really love
Yeah.
that. And I'd love for you to share how listeners can find you.
People can reach out at Stephany Ann Speaks at gmail.com. That's my email. And I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. Yeah. And so right now I'm only working just one-on-one EFT. I mentioned earlier, my first husband passed away 3 weeks ago. I have 3 little boys. I really feel right now I just need to focus on them. So I'm still doing my speaking and writing.
Mm-hmm.
I will work with a few people right now, but it's
Sure.
really just focusing my
Yes,
time on my boys right now. And they
absolutely.
know how to tap as well.
Isn't that
I've done
beautiful?
a lot of I've
Yes.
done a lot of tapping with them. And in fact, my 9-year-old about a month ago, he's like, Mom, I was sitting in school in class and I was tapping on how I'm going to be a professional soccer player. And he was tapping on his positive soccer skills. And I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, right on. Do
There you
it.
go. Do it. Absolutely.
So
Because
it's
why
powerful.
could you not? You can certainly tap in your present self, but why could we not tap to our future self? Why
Oh
not?
yeah, I do a lot of that. I
Absolutely.
am becoming this. I'm doing this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you for taking the time, Stephany. I'm so thrilled we had this chat together.
Me too.
Really
Thank you
great.
for having me on your show.
Absolutely.